I was holding my mother's hand when she died. Well, more accurately, I was screaming into her face, begging her not to go when her hand went limp in mine. It wasn't peaceful like the movies. It wasn't gentle. It was terrifying. One moment she was trying to whisper something to me, and the next she was gone just like that. I remember the beeping of the heart monitor turning into one long, unbroken tone, and the nurse gently placing her hand on my shoulder, telling me to take my time with a voice so soft it felt cruel. I didn't take my time. I ran. I left the room, the hospital, the town. I left everything. I boarded the first bus leaving Chicago and rode until the sun came up in a place I'd never been, phone turned off, wallet almost empty. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't go back to the version of me who had buried his mother and would now return home to a house full of ghosts. I remember thinking as I sat on a bench in a town I couldn't name, maybe I'll start over, be someone else. The thought came before I even realized what it meant, before I realized that maybe I'd been trying to be someone else my whole life. It was in that blur of grief and confusion that I met Micah. Or rather, he found me. I was hunched over outside a 24-hour diner trying to keep my shaking hands from dropping the coffee I'd just bought with my last crumpled $5 bill when he sat down beside me without a word. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer pity. Instead, he pulled out a sketchbook and started to draw just like that, as if he belonged there next to me. I was too tired to care. But when I glanced sideways and saw my own face taking shape in charcoal lines, messy hair, tired eyes, a haunting shadow of pain on my mouth, I froze. I like to draw what's invisible, he said softly, still focused on the page. You've got a lot of invisible. I didn't reply. What do you even say to something like that? But I stayed. And when he offered me a spare key to his place later that night, I took it, not because I trusted him, but because I didn't trust myself to survive the night otherwise. That first night in his tiny apartment was strange, not for the reasons you'd think. Nothing happened, at least nothing physical. We didn't even talk much. He gave me his bed and slept on the floor, wrapped in a sleeping bag with a hole in the side, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, hearing the soft rustle of his breathing below me. For the first time in days, I felt like I was still real. Not just grief wearing my skin. That was the beginning, though I didn't know it yet. Not of falling in love, that came later, much later. But the beginning of learning that there were versions of me I hadn't met yet. Versions not built on shame or silence. I didn't know I was searching for someone. Hell, I didn't even know I was lost. But Micah saw me before I did. And that terrified me more than anything else in the world. Let me know when you're ready for paragraph 2. It only gets deeper and wilder from here. Micah wasn't normal, at least not in the way people typically describe the word. There was something about him that didn't fit neatly into any box, and I could see it from the way he carried himself, the confidence he had in being absolutely, unapologetically himself. He didn't ask permission to exist in spaces, he simply did. I'd never met anyone like him before. He didn't need validation. He didn't need a reason to laugh loud or dress like he owned the world, even if he barely had enough to fill his refrigerator. He dropped little comments here and there that made me wonder if he was daring me to figure him out. And as it turns out, I was desperate to. We spent a lot of time together in those first weeks. He showed me the town's small, quirky places that tourists never knew about and spots where locals went to drink, argue, or just sit in quiet. He introduced me to a small group of friends who, like him, wore their identities on their sleeves. They weren't perfect people, none of them were, but there was this strange kind of peace that lived between them. They didn't have to prove anything to anyone, they just were. I envied that so much. One night, as we walked back from a dive bar near the water, Micah stopped suddenly and turned to me, his expression serious in a way I hadn't seen before. You think you know who you are, right? He asked as the soft hum of the river played beneath the sound of our footsteps. I didn't know how to respond. He'd been asking me questions like that for weeks, about family, about love, about why I always kept myself so far from people, but it wasn't until that moment that I realized how much he was pushing me to confront things I wasn't ready to face. His dark eyes fixed on mine, waiting for an answer, but all I could do was look at the ground. He sighed, and I saw the hint of something deeper in his eyes, something almost painful. It's okay, not knowing, but you gotta stop running from it. You can't outrun who you are no matter how fast you go. I wanted to argue, to say that I wasn't running, that I was just lost, trying to find my way, but something about his words made me freeze, paralyzed me. It felt too personal, too close to truth I didn't want to admit even to myself. And that's when it happened. He reached out, grabbed my hand, and for the briefest moment our eyes locked in a way that felt like more than just a friend reaching out to comfort another. His touch was electric, but it was also gentle. There was no hurry, no expectation, just this quiet understanding that neither of us was ready to face yet. I pulled away almost instinctively, heart racing, mind in chaos. But Micah didn't push me. He just smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my pulse quicken. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind swirling with questions I didn't have answers to, I realized something. He wasn't just showing me the town, he was showing me myself, the version of me I'd buried so deep I almost didn't remember it existed. I hadn't been looking for him, and yet here he was, holding up the mirror I never wanted to see, not with judgment but with love. It terrified me how much I needed him. And in that terrifying moment, I started to wonder if the truth he was pushing me toward was something I might be ready for after all. Ready for paragraph 3, this is when the twists really start to unfold. A week later, I found myself sitting across from Micah in the diner again, and this time the quiet between us felt different. It wasn't just the hum of the old jukebox in the corner or the clink of silverware on plates. It was something heavier, something that lingered in the air. The rain had started to fall outside, and the windows fogged up as if the world itself was holding its breath. Micah was sketching again, but this time his eyes weren't focused on me. His focus was distant, like he was drawing the last few threads of something we were both unwilling to say. I sat back in the booth, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, feeling the pulse of uncertainty settle deep in my chest. "I've been thinking a lot," he said after what felt like hours of silence. He placed the pencil down and leaned back, his arms crossed. "About you, about us, what's been happening between us?" His eyes met mine, sharp and clear. "I think you know what I mean." My throat tightened and I could feel the cold sweat gathering on the back of my neck. It was like I had been holding my breath for weeks, waiting for him to say something, but I wasn't prepared for this. Not the way he was looking at me, like he could see everything. Like he could see through all the walls I'd built, the ones I thought would keep me safe. "Micah," the words caught in my throat. The last thing I wanted to do was to admit it, but my heart was already betraying me. I'd been pretending for so long, convincing myself that what we had was just friendship, just comfort in the midst of pain. But the truth was, it was something more. It had always been more. I just hadn't let myself see it. "Don't say anything yet," he interrupted, and his voice softened, more fragile than I'd ever heard it before. "I'm not asking you to give me an answer right now, but I want you to think about something. Think about how long you've been hiding from who you are, not just hiding from other people, but from yourself." His words hit me like a fist in the gut. He wasn't just talking about the grief about my mother. He was talking about everything, the years of denying parts of me, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, of not letting myself feel what I was truly feeling. Micah was giving me permission to be honest in a way no one ever had before. And as much as I hated him for it, I knew he was right. I looked away, trying to steady the storm of emotions swirling inside of me. I don't know if I can do that, Micah," I muttered, the words barely escaping my lips. I had never felt more exposed in my life. He didn't need to hear me say it, he knew. But I couldn't bear the idea of losing myself in something I wasn't ready to face. There was too much fear, too much shame wrapped around the idea of being me. I thought of all the times I'd told myself that I couldn't be anything other than what the world expected, straight, controlled, closed off. But with Micah, I felt like I was beginning to crack open, like a door I'd kept locked for so long was finally creaking open. Despite my desperate attempts to keep it shut, that's when it happened. Micah, for the first time, reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was warm, grounding, and I could feel the pulse of his heart through his fingertips. It was in that moment that I realized how much I had been running away from something I didn't understand. And how much I wanted to understand it now. I wasn't ready to say it. I wasn't ready to step into the unknown. But for the first time, I realized that I wanted to be brave enough to try. Let me know when you're ready for the next part. It only gets more complex from here, trust me. The weeks that followed were a blur, days where I felt like I was walking on the edge of a precipice, and nights where I could barely keep my thoughts from unraveling. Micah and I kept our distance at first. He gave me space just as he'd promised, but the silence between us was thick, like it had taken on a life of its own. I spent hours in my head trying to make sense of everything I was feeling, everything I was becoming. I didn't want to be that person who was always afraid to face the truth, but I couldn't help it. Every time I thought about Micah, about the way he made me feel, something in me resisted. I wanted to be close to him, so close it hurt, but I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive the consequences of that closeness. I was scared, terrified actually, not just of the world finding out who I was, but of losing the fragile identity I had left, the one that had been built on pretending and silence. It wasn't until that Friday evening, when I found myself standing on the edge of the old pier with Micah by my side, that I finally understood. The sky was bruised with the last remnants of daylight, the softest hints of orange and purple fading into the approaching night. The wind pulled at my hair and the air smelled of saltwater and distant rain. Micah stood next to me a few inches away, but it felt like miles. He didn't ask questions, he didn't try to make me talk. He just stood there watching the water, waiting for me to speak. And when I finally did, my voice was barely a whisper, so small it felt almost like I wasn't even speaking to him. "I'm scared, Micah. I'm scared of what happens if I start being honest. If I really admit who I am, everything changes. I'm afraid of what it might cost me, what it might cost us." There was no hesitation in his response, no judgment, no pity, just a soft smile and a quiet acknowledgement of what I was feeling. "It's not about the cost, though. It's about whether or not you're ready to live, really live." His words cut through the air like a knife, clear and simple, but they landed heavy like an anchor in my chest. "You can keep pretending, keep hiding, but that's not living, Tristan, that's surviving, and surviving is lonely. You don't have to do this alone." I turned to him then, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. The depth I saw there took my breath away, so full of quiet understanding, so utterly open, as though he was letting me see all the parts of him he hadn't shared yet. That was the moment I realized he wasn't afraid, not like me. He wasn't scared of what might happen if he let himself be seen for who he truly was. He was already living his truth, and I had been standing in his shadow, too afraid to take a single step into the light. Micah reached for my hand then, his fingers sliding between mine, warm and steady. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the rhythmic lapping of the water against the pier, the world holding its breath as if it too was waiting for me to make my move. And for the first time, I knew I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't pretend I wasn't feeling everything I had been trying to bury inside me. I wasn't ready to fully face it, not yet. But with Micah beside me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could begin to. And that small, terrifying spark of possibility of truth was enough to make my heart catch in my chest. It wasn't about finding the right words or even the right time. It was about choosing to take the first step toward the life I'd been afraid to claim for so long. Ready for the final twist in paragraph 5. This is where it all comes full circle. Let me know when you're set. The days that followed felt different. Lighter, even though I was still carrying so much. Micah didn't push me, didn't try to rush me towards some destination I wasn't ready for. But with every passing day, I found myself peeling back layers I didn't even know I'd built. I began to understand what he had been telling me, that living, truly living, wasn't about reaching some perfect, polished version of yourself. It wasn't about being who the world expected you to be or who you thought you had to be. It was about showing up, being honest, even if it meant feeling exposed, raw. There was no neat package, no clear path forward, but I wasn't running anymore. I was present, I was here, I was learning to breathe without holding my breath. It wasn't long after that, though, that everything shattered. We were out walking one afternoon, and Micah was laughing about something silly when he stopped suddenly, his face going pale. I knew something was wrong before he even said it. I felt it in my gut. Micah had always been open with me, always fearless when it came to his emotions, his thoughts, his past, but this was different. Tristan, he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. I need to tell you something. I braced myself, not knowing what was coming but feeling that same panic flood my chest. The words that followed felt like they were coming from 1,000 miles away, distant and sharp. I haven't been completely honest with you about me, about my past. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not even the person you think you're falling for. He looked at me, his eyes wide, like he was waiting for me to pull away, to run. My heart clenched, and for the first time I was terrified of the truth he was about to give me. But I stayed. Micah confessed, his voice breaking with every word. He wasn't exactly running from the world, not in the way I had been. He had built walls too, not out of fear of himself, but out of fear of what love meant in a world that so often tried to erase people like him. He had been hiding his identity too, in a different way than I had been. What I hadn't known was that Micah had been married, had been in a relationship with a woman for 5 years before everything had collapsed. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a realization that what he thought was love, what he had forced himself to believe, wasn't who he was at all. He'd been keeping that from me because he didn't know how to tell me that even though he had known for years, he wasn't ready to come to terms with it himself. And suddenly, the world was too much. It felt like I was staring into the face of everything I was afraid of becoming, someone who had lived a lie, someone who had denied themselves for so long that they didn't even know who they were anymore. But then Micah took my hand again, just like he had that night on the pier, and said the one thing I never expected to hear from him. You were the missing piece I didn't know I was searching for. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't the lies that had broken us. It wasn't the walls we had both built around our hearts. It was the fear that we wouldn't be enough for each other, that we couldn't love each other the way we needed to, but we could. And the fear faded, replaced by something stronger, something I'd never believed I would feel again: hope. It wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning, because even though Micah had been hiding parts of himself from me, and even though I had been running from my own truth, we were both learning that there was room for all of us. The pieces that didn't fit, the ones that had felt broken, could still be put together. We didn't have to be perfect to love each other, we just had to be honest. And that honesty, that rawness, was the missing piece, the one I hadn't even known I was searching for until it had already found me.